east, west, north, south, floor style. Kiss the ring.
Every piece of art is about something. Everything has some sort of end goal to get across to its audience, even if its sole purpose is to entertain. Which brings me to Tsukasa Fushimi and his works. You see, I've never directly engaged with any of his works in their entirety, and yet I have a seething, burning disdain for both of his major works, especially his first major work. What works has this man produced, you may be asking? Tsukasa Fushimi is the author of the infamous Ore no Imoto ga Kono ni Kawai Waka ga Nai, better known as Oreimo. The title translates to My Little Sister Can't Be This Cute. It was his first popular work, and it's downright infamous, at least in the West. The hatred and the adulation for the series has gone down these days solely due to its age, but its legacy definitely lives on. I can say that with confidence because of two things. If you mention its name to other people who are big into anime, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. That, and its controversial subject matter, manages to transfer over into Fushimi's next work, a series called Eromanga-Sensei. But the real question is this: why do I hate both of these series, even though I've never watched them? Well, it has to do with the content and the subject matter. Oreimo is about Kyosuke Kosaka and his sister Kirino Kosaka, and how they mend their relationship after he discovers she's into anime. She shows him the weird and quirky world of being an anime nerd, and the two manage to reforge their familial bond. However, the problem that I and many others have with the series is that their bond doesn't stay familial, and the series infamously ends with the siblings falling in love with each other despite every other prominent member of the cast trying to dissuade them from entering a relationship. As someone who has siblings and was raised in a loving family, the mere mention of incest is abhorrent to me fundamentally. And that's why, for me personally, I didn't like the series at all. What made it worse for me is that the cast of the series was also against the idea, and they go through why it's a really bad thing to do with the siblings multiple times, and yet the two still end up together, defying societal norms and the will of all their loved ones, and it's seen as a happy ending. That turned me away from the series for years. And then with Eromanga-Sensei, it's the same premise of a disconnected brother and sister, but this time they're step-siblings and they both work in the light novel industry. The brother's a writer and the sister's been working as this popular erotic artist that he's secretly been working with without him knowing. That and this sibling pair and the cast they find themselves surrounded by seems to be younger than the characters in Oreimo. Kyosuke and Kirino are 17 and 14 respectively. The pair in Eromanga-Sensei are 16 and 13, but the sister and other prominent female characters are visually presented as being immature, let's say. Since I was yet again disgusted by the premise, and am not interested in little girls, this show was also one I decided to stay far away from. But why talk about it now? Why bring them up at all? Well, the fact that they both exist and achieved notoriety and prestige, at least within the anime fan communities, fascinates and disgusts me. But then I got to thinking about both series as art pieces and not just vessels of entertainment for certain fetishes, and that made me curious. I feel as if the shows are deplorable on a surface level, but I can't say that for sure since I never took the time out of my life to actually engage with them. Therefore, I can't say for sure if they're vacuous wastes of effort only good for keeping the artists involved with the franchise employed. So in order to put my money where my mouth is, I gained access to Oreimo and booted up Crunchyroll for Eromanga-Sensei and decided to watch both of them in order to figure out what exactly they're about and whether or not they're successful in getting their themes across. I'm not confident in their ability to change my mind, but hey, all of this was written before actually watching anything, so maybe they'll be better than I think. I decided not to try reading the original light novels for both of them, because while it'd be the most direct way to experience Fushimi's original vision for both franchises, from what I can tell, the anime adaptations are the most approachable, and I'm handicapping myself by giving him the benefit of the doubt here. That, and if it's an anime, at least it'll be harder for me to give up on it. Hopefully the this actually go somewhere and I'm not just a fool that's about to mentally harm himself just to feel something other than the miasma of dread in a year that's done nothing but isolate me from my friends and family and radicalize me towards politics as the very real threat of fascism grows darker and darker, spreading across the world? Yeah, that'd be crazy. Fuck the show, man. Alright. I came into this already knowing what the end of the franchise was going to be in the first place, and now that I've seen it, I can say that Oremo isn't as incest focused as I thought it would be, and even though I went in with low expectations, in certain cases it still fell beneath them. The premise of the series is entering otaku culture as an outsider through the gaze of eroge games and dealing with the societal repercussions that could come from diving headfirst and possibly too far into the hobbies people enjoy. Starting by diving in headfirst into the racier portions of the community, the specific fetish eroge games that they put on display, and the lighthearted magical girl shows that the characters watch, using Kyo as the straight man to Kirino, Sari, and Ruri's otaku weirdness. And then on the side we'd have the familial drama, as well as the social drama from characters unrelated to the otaku cast members. We get that, and it does that, but instead of keeping the focus on the premise itself, Fushimi shifted gears to focusing solely on the character drama. And while not a bad direction to take the story, by the end of the series you completely forget that it was about hobbies and how those affect people's lives and their perceptions. And even then, based off of the end of the series, you can read the text as a condemnation of hobbies, specifically the hobby that Kirino herself engages in and gets her brother into. The whole ethos of Oremo is that you should enjoy your hobbies because they're a part of who you are, and you should keep engaging with that content / those activities that bring you joy, regardless of the social consequences that you may face. And more importantly, you can be rich, poor, athletic, lazy, fashionable, have a full career, and still be into a nerd hobby or a weird hobby. And it's always presented as a net positive thing. Like, Kirino indulged in her hobby openly thanks to her brother, and then she wrote a project herself, became a contributor to the community she's so fond of, and achieved major success in doing so. And yet, the show omits any possible negatives that could come from being an otaku in the anime gaming scene. We don't see any creepy people, we don't see any neats, we don't see any hikikomori. We see Fujoshi, considering the main heroines are like these nerdy girls, right? But the really bad ones are all represented by one character, Sena Akagi. She's the BL fan, and she's always presented in the negative when she talks about her hobbies. But the only acknowledgement of negatives to being an otaku other than her would be Riri, because she's like a chunibyo. She's always pretending that she's like the heroine of some type of edgy magical girl show, you know? But that's not an issue for her, really. Like, she still has like a whole squad of friends, she still has like appropriate social skills. Like, it doesn't really factor into her life in any negative way. But a negative that is straight up ignored by our protagonists is how the media we consume can have an effect on our perceptions of things. For example, Kirino is a brocon, and she has been ever since she was a child. But up until he was neck deep into playing eroge at her request, Kyosuke didn't see his sister like that. There were events outside of the eroge that led him towards making the decisions he made, but the characters nor the viewers can deny the fact that both siblings played hours upon hours worth of incest porn games and then ended up in a relationship for some time. It was less than a year, a few months at most, but that doesn't make it any better. If the point of the series is that it's okay for one to engage with their interest no matter the social consequences, and the way they display this modus operandi is to have the titular little sister be allowed by the majority of the cast to enter a relationship with her blood brother and display that as a positive thing, then it defeats its own point. Granted, Kyo fully accepts being in the wrong in order to bear the responsibility of the relationship for the sake of his sister, but still, the only thing he loses for entering the relationship is the respect and friendship from his childhood friend. And that's just the effect diving into the hobby had for someone who was only 2 years into said hobby. But Kirino, the one who has been into the hobby for years and years and years, suffers zero consequences for her actions and her decisions. Kyosuke takes the entirety of the damage from Kirino's decisions and rash actions. The people actively engaged with otaku culture suffer no real consequences for doing so. Her friend didn't accept her hobby for a day and that was it. Which leads me to my biggest problem with the series. It abandoned the premise to focus on the characters, and most of those characters are one note at best and actively annoying at worst. And even the main antagonist of the franchise was completely and utterly in the right and did a good thing by accidentally kicking off the events of the series. And people should agree with her and not our protagonists. The protagonists live heathenish lives, but our primary antagonist, Manami, expresses and explains that they're in the wrong, their feelings are fleeting, and they won't be able to keep up the facade for long or in front of the rest of their family, and they'll suffer greatly for trying to do so. And Kyosuke's only response to that boils down to, I hear what you're saying, but fuck it. It sticks to his guns, but it went too far, unrepentantly too far. And for a series that starts out with characters that were delightfully self-aware, the ending is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow. Instead of being a celebration of the culture that spawned it, it reads more like a cautionary tale more than anything else, despite how the framing and tone would try to sell it to you as a happy ending. Oremo isn't as baseless as I thought it was, and it even has what I can call merits to it, and it genuinely has some of the best crowd shots I've seen in anime. The visual presentation is solid the whole way through, with splashes of genuinely great character acting animation. The staging of shots is decent overall, despite having a shot focus on Kirino's ass at least once per episode. Riri, Kyosuke, and Kirino get the most development overall, and I can call it legitimate development throughout the series. But the best characters in this franchise are the ones with flat character arcs, the ones that change the setting rather than themselves, those being Saori and Manami. Manami, and I can't stress this enough, literally did nothing wrong throughout the entirety of the story. Neither did Saori up until the ending, because she just brushes off the siblings' relationship as something that doesn't matter as long as they can all hang out together, which is not great. Not great at all. But this is the first time and the last time I will watch this series. I gave it a chance and it still pissed me off. Fuck Kirino, she's a bitch, and I could say that without reservation. Kyosuke is a nice person, but he's a fucking doormat to an egregious degree. And the soundtrack, it's garbage. The interaction between characters was honestly solid, but the plot itself is silly at best and reprehensible at worst. After watching through it all, I can say it's alright, it's okay. It's not trash, it has redeeming qualities in it, but the moments of actual enjoyment it wrings out of you are so few and far between. I can't recommend it to anyone, let alone someone who's not already into anime like that. But I'd say there's a clear argument to be made that Fushimi didn't start the series out with the intention of it being a full-on incest story. I'd say it only turned into that 5 episodes into season 2, which would have been volume 7 out of 12. Till then, you could say that there was a healthy balance between the premise and the character drama, but after that he fell into completing it as an incest story. But the worst of the shit is over. Now you can move on to what he made afterwards. So the first show was self-defeating in the way it fumbled its bag into that ending, but what of Eromanga-Sensei? From what I understand, the anime only covers material from the first 3 light novels and touches on material found later on, but the full story isn't completed if you watch the anime or go through the available light novels as of now. So let's find out what I'm able to conclude from this latest piece. I need a shower. But honestly, Eromanga-Sensei is a much less frustrating show to watch than Oremo. The art style is more cutesy, for lack of a better word, with its more saturated and bright colors, decent background art, while not having a unique stylistic flair. It opts for a compromise with realistic and bright, ideal lighting aesthetics overall. The staging in the series is noticeably superior to Oremo's with the boarding and direction, especially in episode 8 in particular. That one was fantastic, visually speaking, and the animation overall is superior as well. Oremo didn't have terrible animation to begin with, but there were times where characters were noticeably stiff. The same applies to Eromanga-Sensei, of course, but the character acting we see on display is fantastic, no cap. Plus, as an ecchi rom-com, it really sells the ecchi part, and it's funnier overall. Eromanga-Sensei made me laugh with quite a few of its jokes early on, not with the direction its story was going in. And blessed be, the characters in Eromanga-Sensei didn't get on my nerves anywhere near as much as they did in Oremo. I actively hated Kirino and Senna, but there's not a single member of the cast in this show that I would beat the shit out of. But probably due to the runtime, characters in Oremo were stronger overall. Even with the story not being finished and the characters having goals and aspirations, you really got to see the nerds branch out and interact in interesting ways thanks to the plot. In Eromanga-Sensei, the characters are honestly paper thin in comparison. We never even find out what Muramasa's home life is like. We don't know why Elf took up writing as a hobby. What's the deal with the editor? Why is Megumi trying so hard to get Sagiri to be her friend? Does the childhood friend even know Sagiri's condition? Who is Muramasa and Sagiri's guardian? These are all things we never find out. Whereas in comparison, I know the main cast of Oremo inside and out. And Oremo has something else Eromanga-Sensei doesn't. Stakes, some sort of tension or reason to believe actions have consequences. In Eromanga-Sensei, the only real conflict introduced is that Muramasa needs to keep publishing consistently, otherwise their guardian will interrupt their current lifestyle somehow. And an episode after that conflict is introduced, it's resolved, and it just turns into the middle school waifu Grand Prix. And Sagiri is a hikikomori. She doesn't go outside of her house and barely leaves her room. They never explore the difficulty of that, or even how her mom's accident led to that. She seemingly doesn't have a terrible social anxiety either, at least by the end of the series, which can be an argument for character development, but just follow me on this one. At first, she doesn't want to interact with anyone unless it's through stomping on her floor to get her brother's attention, or through a live stream for her followers. She meets Elf and Muramasa face to face for the first time when she's declaring that neither of them can take Masamune away from her. After that, she allows them into her room. It's not therapy or anything, but after meeting with them once, she's able to interact with them the way she interacts with her brother. So where does her aversion towards school and the general public come from? If it's anxiety about being abandoned by her mother, the series never explains nor explores that. If it's anxiety caused by seeing too many people at once, the show never explores that either. We get the initial reason why and the precedent for her staying in a room all the time, but we don't know why she continues the behavior and continues it for so long that it mentally and physically strains her to go down the stairs to greet her brother. The series had a chance to say something about overworking yourself in a demanding creative industry, or just losing yourself to your job or your hobbies in general, using her hikikomoriism as a vehicle for that kind of narrative, but that isn't the case. Eromanga-Sensei is no welcome to the NHK. That being said, Eromanga-Sensei does know exactly what it is, an ecchi rom-com between siblings again. But they're step siblings, so it's not as violently repulsive as the last, nor does it fly in the face of and directly contradict its own mission statement either. But while still disgusting, it does tell us up front that as soon as the two meet, they felt something for one another. Masamune fell in love with her at first sight, but buried and continues to bury those feelings because he's her brother now. Whereas Sagiri didn't fall in love at first sight, but fell in love with him later on. So much so that while calling him her big brother, she doesn't consider him family at all, even after the parents died, and despite having his last name. And to make it more apparent, the two arguably fell for each other when they were little kids, talking to each other over the internet, inspiring one another to become industry professionals. Sagiri eventually realized that it was Masamune who she was talking to back then, but Masamune doesn't connect the dots by the time the anime finished its run. But while knowing that it's going to be a love story between step siblings from the beginning makes it less frustrating to watch, since you know what you're getting into by the time the opening starts playing, The foundation that the series built upon is nothing more than paper thin. The series has little nuggets of wisdom in regards to writing and creativity in general, but it has fucking nothing to say about the actual process of art making or light novel distribution, or how one gets adapted into an anime, or how to handle criticism from people you don't know. It doesn't do anything interesting with the premise it's built on, other than giving side characters unlimited wealth to spend on shenanigans, and give some sort of justification for whatever bullshit they're about to get into this episode. But despite the frustrating loss of potential, it's still an easy to watch series, despite how boring I think it is, especially towards the end. But hey, according to spoilers for the novels that I read, at least it's not just gonna be a step-sibling ending, it'll be a poly ending. That's right, everybody, he's going the harem route this time. So, out of his entire catalog, I was right in assuming Fushimi's most popular works were Oremo and Eromanga-Sensei. His other works never reached the same level of success and are published through other companies anyway. But focusing on Dengeki Bunko and both Eromanga and Oremo, the common threads between the two are as follows. You've got one sibling actively engaged in some facet of nerd culture. You've got another sibling either just getting into it or secretly already into it. You have light novels and creativity brought up, as well as anime production being this very treasured and sought after goal characters have for themselves. You've got a bevy of side characters, and most of them end up falling in love with the main male protagonist. You've got some form of homophobic jokes aimed at the male lead's discomfort. Chunibyo are key characters in both. One character looks down on nerd culture as a whole, and both stories have incest in some way. Oremo at least starts with trying to explore nerd culture in Japan, but Eromanga-Sensei has no such exploration, and the nerd culture on view here is merely a vehicle for events to occur. Oremo was trying to say something about being a nerd. The thought was that Eromanga would say something about being a creator, but in the end it really doesn't. And that's disappointing, because while Eromanga-Sensei is far more palatable than Oremo has something to say, but Eromanga-Sensei just doesn't. But Oremo said what it wanted to say, and directly, violently contradicted itself. They both got the game kind of fucked up, but at least Eromanga-Sensei is built from the ground up to be gross, whereas arguably Oremo wasn't. But intentions can only get you so far, and for what it's worth, at least I can say that his prose in both franchises is passable enough. Characters talk like real people for the most part, anime caricatures of real people, but the dialogue was believable in places regardless. But prose alone can't save a shit plot, and can't save a series with no plot. In the end, I now have an even worse impression of Oremo, while my impressions of Eromanga-Sensei actually improved quite a bit. I can never recommend Oremo to anyone, whether you're hard into that anime life, and especially if you're just getting into it. I can recommend Eromanga-Sensei clips on Sakugaboru at least. If you're real bored, you can give it a shot, but other than that, this gets a pass. I suppose Fushimi just has a little sister fetish, just like Kirino did. Can't say it was in all of his work, but certainly in his most popular ones. And I can't say he paints it in a negative light, so he must not be super opposed to it. On the other hand, this was a deeply comforting experience for myself, because I now feel way better about myself as a person. Definitely not perfect, but at least I'm not so fucked in the head that I'd try anything like that. And I can take some solace in that. And I won't have to ever worry about somebody calling me a prude or some shit for not liking these shows, because I watched them. You can't tell me shit. If you like his work, more power to you, but none of his works are for me, man. I'm gonna go back to watching good shows now. Peace.